Introducing NASM One, NASM's ultimate membership program. Unlock access to everything your fitness career needs to succeed. Unlimited CEUs, free courses, access to our premium app, and exclusive discounts, all for $35 a month. NASM One is best-in-class tools, cutting-edge certifications, confidence in your craft, and everything you do as a personal trainer made easy, so we can achieve our greatest goals together as one.
You're listening to Random Fit with hosts Wendy Batts and Ken Miller, winner of a Gold Markham Award for Digital Media.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Random Fit with myself, Wendy Batts, and friend and co-host Ken Miller. Ken, how are you?
Great, Wendy. How you doing?
I am doing excellent. Today, we're going to actually talk about unraveling the mysteries of the knee. But before we dive deep into the content, I wanted to let everyone know that if you look in our show notes, there is a link, and it is a link to a survey. It's a survey that's going to ask questions about what we can do to better our podcast. And we want to make sure that we are providing you with the content information that you want to hear. So if you take some time, fill out that survey, you have the opportunity to win a $100 gift card to Amazon. So we would love for you to provide us some feedback. So then maybe you have that. Maybe you're the big winner.
Who doesn't want $100?
I know. You asked me that last time, and I want $100. So
yeah. As long as I can use it at the grocery store. If I could use it at the grocery store.
Well, Amazon, there's a lot of things you can just, especially if you have Prime.
There you go. There you go.
Just saying. Well, today we're going to talk about, like I said, unraveling the mysteries of the knee. This is a joint that we hear a lot about. Unfortunately, it does not have a mind of its own, and it's actually directed by what's happening at the ankle and the hip. And I think sometimes we really just focus on the knee when we need to look above and below it. So just a quick anatomy about the knee itself. We've got three major bones. So you've got your femur, which is your thigh bone, your tibia, your shin, and the patella. And the way that the bones come together, it does more of what we call a hinge joint. It's a hinge joint. So it goes into flexion and extension. There's just a little bit of rotation and slight sideways movements. However, that's why when we hear, especially during football and basketball, we hear some things go wrong with the knee and most of the ligaments. I'll let you kind of break that down. But it's because it was not made to go completely to the side or extremely forward and backwards either. So,
yeah, that's where the definite, when you look at the motions of the knee, primarily it's a hinge joint, but all moving joints move in all planes of motion. And when we talk about planes of motion, we're talking about forward, back, side to side, or left to right, and then rotation. So the knee does all of those things. It's not meant to do flexion and rotation and the lateral motion all to the same degree, but that's where we would consider the knee as a hinge joint. But it does have allowance for that internal rotation as well as that adduction or the knees coming towards that midline. So we have to allow for that, but we have to allow for that to move with control. We need to be able to decelerate and accelerate, but it's that deceleration when the knees are caving in and it goes in too far for too long, and that's when we have trouble. So when we hear about structures like the ACL and the PCL, which is the anterior cruciate ligament as well as the posterior cruciate ligament, these are two ligaments that cross from the femur to the tibia. So with the femur, so Wendy, you did a great job listing off the bones, but the femur, the bottom of the femur basically have two knobs, and between those two knobs at the bottom of the femur, the ACL and the PCL run through and they cross each other, and that's what controls that forward and backward motion of the knee. But also with that, you have the medial collateral as well as lateral collateral ligaments, and those are what controls that right to left motion. So you have the knee that primarily moves forward and back in that sagittal plane in that hinge motion, but you have these ligaments that I just talked about that acts to support the knee so it doesn't go too far forward or too far back or too far in and too far out. So you have these structures that are in place to help manage all that. Now, as you mentioned, Wendy, with contact sports like football and sports like basketball, where there's a lot of running, stopping, jumping, sprinting, lateral work, you're putting a lot of forces through the knee. Well, a lot of forces go through the knee, but as you mentioned, it is subject to what's happening above and below it. So with the basic anatomy of the knee and the ligaments, you have the muscles that cross, but the ligaments are there to help support the knee as far as not going too far forward or forward, back, and left to right.
Well, and that's why I love, you always give those examples when we present. So that's why I wanted to hand that over to you. Such a graceful job.
Okay.
But when we talk about the foot and ankle, I know we're stressing and really focusing on the knee, but the foot and ankle, we want about 20 degrees of dorsiflexion. So if you're sitting there and you bring your toes up towards your nose and you're trying to think about bending your foot backwards, if you're lacking that range of motion, then what ends up happening is it causes excess stress to the knee joint. And the knee, because it's kind of stuck in the middle, the hip is also going to be affected. And I think a lot of times when you're looking at someone, and just watch people walk, but if you watch people squat or even bend and you notice that someone is weak in the feet and their arches fall downward, so meaning that they become almost flat foot, but then when they're not weight bearing, they have a really nice arch. That just shows those weakness in the foot. And I know we've talked multiple times in different podcasts about the importance of really having good stability through the arch of your foot, because what it does is it raises up your bones in the lower part of your leg, which then holds that knee into proper position without excess stress. As soon as you start to lose that arch, it causes more length to the inside of your leg, and then your feet sometimes will start to turn outward. And so instead of it being that nice clean hinge joint, it's now there's more excess stress being placed to that, especially on the outside movements, Ken, which you went over. And so really getting good length back into the outside of the calf, getting good strength on the inside of the calf, really working on good flexibility at just even the foot and ankle, that alone can take a lot of stress off the what we call the medial or inside portion of the knee, which unfortunately, if you over time, if you're not careful, you'll end up having your knees coming inward when you're squatting, and think about all your body weight going downward without having the protection of the foot and ankle and everything being ultimately lined up.
So when it comes to this joint, a lot of times it is about the squeaky wheel getting the grease, right, Wendy? So when you talk about the foot, when you go over as eloquently as you did, as far as what the foot does, as far as that pronation or the foot arch collapsing or the feet turning out, the heel bone turning in and the foot turning out, those are all normal things. And we don't want to bring those movements up without putting some context to it, though. But those are normal movement patterns. And just like what we were talking about with the knee and the ligaments, it's when the foot, in those examples you brought up, Wendy, they go too far, too fast, or they're too long with the foot arch. So maybe they have a good arch when they're in certain parts of the walking phase. But when they're in that phase where you're going from your heel to the forefoot, maybe that foot arch collapses way too far and it's there too long to where you're not producing the force you need to use the hips and get the knee to go through that extension. But what happens is what you just said, Wendy, the foot arch, the foot turns out because it's like, I need to stay on the ground a little bit longer. So I'm going to keep the foot, I'm going to have the foot kind of turn out so we can have a little bit more contact time. But that's what leads to all those errant movements that you talked about. So the foot turns out, the knee turns in. And, if you're doing something like on a treadmill or you're on the road, you're running 2 miles that day, every step that's made during that session is going to be in that position, because if you didn't address ankle movement, like you said, Wendy, the foot up towards the nose, if that isn't happening, your foot and ankle and your knee, they're going to reroute, because all your brain knows is I want to move forward. And whatever I got to do to move forward, I'm going to make that happen. But if that means zigging through the foot and zagging through the knee, unfortunately, that does lead to that stress to those structures that we brought up earlier.
Yeah, and when we say everything's interconnected, I mean, just think about how many things cross the knee joint itself. You know, we always hear people talk about, oh, my IT band, I've got IT band syndrome, and it's causing, you know, issues at my hip and then at the knee. I mean, think about this. The IT band is not a muscle. So when people are foam rolling and they're like, oh, my IT band is sore or it really hurts, it's really the outside quads that you're foam rolling. It's just this big cartilage piece of thickness running to the side of your leg, that the muscle itself is from the TFL. And so the TFL is often overactive, which means it can really play a lot of key roles in messing up the knee if it's not in good position, because that TFL then blends into that IT band that crosses the outside of the knee joint. So that's something where if you really want to open up the hips and try to relax some of the knee, especially if it goes inward or outward, that TFL could be just the culprit alone. And if you take time and work on that, sometimes that can help relieve some of the stress on the knee. Another thing too is something called the short head of the bicep femoris. And it's one of the small hamstring muscles that attach to the lower part of the leg, crosses the knee joint on the outside of your calf. And so that often becomes overactive as well, especially if you're noticing too that, oh my goodness, I feel all of this tightness here. Foam roll that area, foam roll your TFL. And then if you notice that the knees are caving in, foam roll the inside of your legs, so your adductors. Then things stop playing tug of war, because if your short head of the bicep fem is pulling your knee kind of outward, your TFL is super tight. So there's a lot of stress on that IT band. And then your adductors are tight, pulling your knee inward. This poor knee is getting pushed in different directions because everything's so tight. And that's what ends up leading, I think, to even more of the discomfort, sometimes inflammation and swelling that can easily be alleviated if you take the time to focus in on those things.
A lot of anatomy there, Wendy.
I didn't mean to. Just foam roll outside, inside, and calf. How about that?
Yeah, boom, done.
Boom.
All right, everybody, have a great day. So like you said, the tensor fascia latae, as we like to, that's our coffee muscle, the tensor fascia lata, is it's a small, but it has a big influence on not just the hip, but as you said, Wendy, because it connects to the IT band, crosses the knee, it has a big influence on not just the hip, the knee, but also the foot, because if it's connected to the lower leg, the shin bone that you mentioned, well, guess what the shin bone's connected to? The ankle. So by extension, the hip is the ankle. Now, when we look at the other side, the adductor, the inner thigh, the brain likes parity. So if it's going to have tension on one side, it likes to say, well, we got a little force here. Let's try and balance things out. And it'll put a little tension and force on the other side of the knee. So that space, that movement between the upper leg bone and the lower leg bone, what space you need for the impact of the knee, you do need some space. Those bones just can't be riding up on each other all the time, having contact too long, too much impact, or even impacting in the wrong places. When if you're tight on the outside and it pulls that outside of that joint down, and if you're tighter on the inside through the adductor complex, and now it's pulling that down in. So what space you did have in the knee joint, it's maybe gone. It's not there as much. So then that means these bones are going to be contacting each other more than what they were meant to, and that's where we start to have issues. So the purpose, I think, Wendy, when we talk about the anatomy, not just in the ligaments and the meniscus and the things that go into what structurally makes the knee, but when we talk muscularly, the influence, as we're talking about, we started with the foot, and that's influence on the knee, and then we're starting with the hip, and then moving on to the hip, and that's influence on the knee. That's where the comment that, the knee is subject to what's happening above and happening below. So one big solution, not the only solution, to having better knee mechanics is through better mobility, just because of what usually happens when we have tight hips, immobile ankles, or unstable ankles. Then the knee, unfortunately, that's what takes the hit. So the ankle's going to say, oh, no, it's his fault. And the hip's going to look down and say, no, it's their fault. And the knee's like, well, fine, I'll just take the blame, right? And that's where we have all those compressive forces or those errant knee motions, to where the knee's moving too far in for too long, or to more of a degree than it was meant to. And that's where we tend to have issues. And you don't have to be a football player, you don't have to be a basketball player to get those injuries that you might hear about when it comes to those sports seasons. I've had friends that had issues, knee issues, stopping, like turning and saying, I forgot my keys. And then they had an ACL issue. I had one buddy of mine who I grew up with, tore his ACL playing soccer, and then doing something not competitive, tore the same ACL again. So question being, okay, did he really do what he needed to do to resolve the initial issues that contributed to the first knee injury? Moving forward, probably not, but it did happen. So unless the hip and the ankle are addressed, then the knee's going to still keep getting or taking the hit when it comes to forces that have to go through that joint.
Oh, that man needed your services, Ken. As some friend you are, right?
My friends don't listen to me.
Right. And today on Random Fit, Ken Miller and myself, Wendy Batts, are talking about the knee and talking about unraveling the mysteries of the knee and why sometimes it is in a position of what's happening here. I know people, when they get on my table, the first thing I do, Ken, and I know you do the same thing, is we have someone lay flat, we kind of pull them straight, and then we look at their ankle bones, and we want to see if one's like more forward than the other, or higher or lower than the other. Then we immediately go and look at the hip bones. And we see the same thing. Is one turning forward, one turning outward? What's happening? Because that tells us a lot about what's happening. Even when people are like, no, but I came to you for my knee, and you're playing with my big toe, and then you're playing with my ankle. Yeah. And so I think oftentimes we forget, or we have to really explain to people the importance of, like you said, really good mobility of the ankle. But one thing I think we tend to forget about is when somebody does have reconstruction, it's very, very important. And so if they did, like your friend had an ACL repair, a meniscus tear, and they went in and had that repaired, the first muscle that I know our physical therapists that we worked with, and what I work with all of my athletes that come back after a knee injury, is trying to really reactivate the VMO. And the VMO is the inside kind of teardrop that's on the inside of that knee. It's one of the quads that kind of wraps around the hip. And that is one of those muscles that really does help kind of the patella and everything function and activate the way that it's intended to. So if you notice that we do a lot of things where there's maybe a bolster, your knees are hanging over, and you're really trying to get good quad activation. It's not that you're using any machines, because we don't use machines. We would do ankle weights. We want the body to be able to go into flexion and extension without the excess force. I think it's one of those things too. It's something super simple, but activating and really focusing on that. I do that with all my runners too. I don't know if you do as well, Ken, but we really focus on activating that. I know bodybuilders do, because that's a beautiful muscle to activate, and everybody wants to have that beautiful teardrop. But that is also one that kind of helps influence the patella and making sure it stays on track through movement.
And that is important, because you can have issues like chondromalacia patella, right? So that's just when the kneecap doesn't align, the grooves behind the kneecap, below the kneecap, that don't align with the grooves of the tendon. So it then will create a little bit more friction, right, which can lead to that inflammation that you're talking about. But that VMO is one of the first muscles that you'll go for when it comes to getting that kneecap to line up better. And I'm only speaking from experience. I had a car accident oh man, almost 30 years ago. And my knee went into the dashboard, right? Yeah, a guy pulled out right in front of me, just out of nowhere, and boom, I went forward. Airbag went off, which is not fun, by the way. But my body kept moving forward, so my knees went into the dashboard. And once all the swelling went away, and I started exercising again, because of the atrophy from the injury, the my knee started higher volume when I was doing higher volume exercises to get my knee better, and the this soreness and that irritation came that wasn't there before. I'm like, why am I hurting now differently than from the actual injury itself? And they said, well, you've got a little chondromalacia. So now the protocol changed to where now it was all terminal knee extension and trying to get that VMO to fire up. And lo and behold, once I got that VMO fired up, like you said, he strapping the bands around my knee and then just going through that end range of motion and turning those muscles on, it went away. I didn't get that teardrop that you're talking about, Wendy.
You didn't work hard enough. Come on now.
On the inside of my thigh that I was hoping for, but my knee felt better.
Well, and I do want to say, that's one of the ones that will help with tracking. But in all reality, one of the muscles that I have seen in, I don't know, majority of my clients, I see in myself, I see in most everyone that I've ever worked with, oftentimes the outer hip is also super weak. So when we're talking about the outer hip muscles, we're particularly talking about your gluteus medius. It's one of those that it's a really small muscle in your glutes. It's not the glute max, not the total big house, but the ones that's a stabilizer. And that actually stabilizes your hip. And so once that starts to become weak, you'll start to notice that your knee will start to cave inward. And that's when we start to have even more stress. Like I talked about before, when you've got medial stress and you're putting more body weight in there. And so we want to strengthen that muscle. So if you notice on your own, you're having some knee issues and you look at yourself in the mirror, look at your feet. We just talked about if they went outward, but if that knee is caving in, try to think about what you can do for the outside of your hip. And I say this almost every podcast. I feel like I'm a huge advocate for clamshells, lateral tube walking, anything that can get that outer hip to fire, because what that will do then, guys, will take those muscles that are causing that inward rotation and bring it back outward. So therefore your hips become more neutral. They're not as twisted. And we know that we're going to have better alignment because that will actually help the realignment of the knee as well.
The glute med is huge. And those exercises you've mentioned, Wayne, the clamshells, tube walking, side-lying straight leg raises, it's all a part of an initial program. I'll do that before I get somebody to do a bridge, because sometimes the bridge, in trying to use the big glute max when it comes to hip extension, there may be other muscles overriding that at the time. But one way to really isolate, or really I don't say isolate, everything works all the time, right? But if we're really trying to place focus or emphasis on a certain area, those exercises are great. So if there's anything you walk away with as a result of listening to this podcast on Unraveling the Mysteries of the Knee on this episode of Random Fit with both Wendy Batts and I, those exercises, tube walking, side-lying, straight leg raise, as well as clamshells, do that and you'll improve hip and knee mechanics overall. But a lot of people, the one point I want to make, and something I emphasize with all my clients, is that not only are we looking at the hips or the glute med, the glute max, as far as extending the hips. And when you're walking, it's when you're pushing, that foot is on the ground and it's behind you and it's helping propel you forward. The other part of it is, and from that vantage point, that's where your hip is acting like a motor. It's pushing, it's producing force, it's concentrically contracting. So it's shortening and pushing you forward. But another role that the hip does is that it also acts as brakes. So when that leg is you're in the swing phase, that leg is in the air and it's getting ready to position itself in front of you. So now you can step onto that next leg. That hip acts as, now it decelerates. So now it goes from acting as an engine to now acting as a brake. So if your engine's great, but your brakes aren't, that's what leads to issues with the knee. Because if your glutes are slowing that leg down when it comes to taking that next step, well, what are some things that are going to happen? Well, the foot may not be in the best position possible compared to if the hip was working well. So if the hip is a little weak, it's not very strong, or it's not very stable, then that foot may not be landing where it needs to have optimal uh, foot ankle contact with the ground. But that might also lead to the knee being in a less than optimal position to take the force once the heel hits the ground. And now all that energy that's coming from that step is now going upwards, but maybe force isn't being dissipated in the right way. So we need to have a big engine, but we need to have even bigger brakes. And that's another thing that the glute medius does that we don't focus on. And that's just the importance of how the hip and the foot need to react when it comes to putting one foot in front of the other, when it comes to walking, running, or whatever it is you're doing.
Mm-hmm. Well, you said that perfectly. So I think now it's one of those, if you're having some knee issues, get yourself into a full length mirror, put your feet straight, put your knees over your toes, put your hands up in the air, squat down, see what you notice. Do your feet go out? Do your knees come in? Do you have an arch? If you do, foam roll the outside of your calf, foam roll the inside and outside of your quad, foam roll your piriformis, which is your outer hip, maybe give some love in the lats, stretch all of those exact same muscles, do the exercises that Ken just said. So I would do toes turn inward for some calf raises. You could do your sideline leg lifts, your clamshells, your tube walking, 1, 2, or all 3. I think going into, even if you notice that you're kind of hunched forward, your lats, which attach to also the lower part of your lower back, if those are tight, you notice a bunch of things happening, and you go in and doing some rows, kind of open yourself back up. It's weird because we always say this, it starts at the foot and ankle and goes all the way up the kinetic chain. So help us help you by taking some time learning about your own body. What are you seeing? And based on what we talked about, maybe you can try to unravel your own mystery of the knee to try to see if there's things that you can do at home to realign that one particular joint by looking above and below it, or both, and seeing if maybe some of the suggestions we gave can maybe take some of the pressure, unnecessary pressure, off of that one particular joint.
And with the knee, one thing that I like to emphasize, I think we said it already as well, and the big takeaway is that the squeaky wheel gets the grease when it comes to pain or discomfort, and the knee is definitely not an exception, to where it's easy to say, yeah, my Wendy, you've had it said to you a million times, somebody's pointing at their knee and they say, oh, it hurts me right here, or it hurts me right there, right? They're pointing on the outside of one knee and they're pointing on the inside of the other. Well, the knee is not the issue. And to complement your summary there, Wendy, the foot and ankle and the hip are the ones running the show. Mm-hmm. And that's where that self-assessment, the self-evaluation that you did, if you notice all that, take those into consideration, because it's so easy to say, I hurt here, why am I not working on there? But you do need to broaden your scope a little bit as far as what you're looking at, and consider, hey, is it the hip, the foot and ankle, or both? And then address that, and you're sure to alleviate some issues there. But this isn't intended to be medical advice. We're not telling you it's like, oh, your knee hurts, yeah, just foam roll. We are saying that these are other things to consider, but seek medical advice, seek the help of a physical therapist, go to your primary, get it looked at, and go seek help if pain and discomfort is your issue, especially if it's something that's been longer term or longer lasting. And then once you're past that point and it's some major things have been ruled out, then go seek the help of a personal trainer, preferably a personal trainer that has a corrective exercise specialization under their belt, and they will actually perform the assessments as we have discussed, but under another set of eyeballs, and they can now guide you as far as, okay, what is the best plan of action to strengthen and whatever your body needs at that point in time. So great episode, Wendy. Thanks for sharing your insight when it comes to the knee, because it is one of those things that can be a little misleading if you're not looking at it the right way.
So true.
So, Wendy, as you mentioned earlier, you have a chance. You, the listener, that is not you, Wendy. You, the chance.
Come on now.
Yeah. You have a chance to win $100 Amazon gift card. But what you have to do to qualify is go to the show notes, go to the description, click on the link, and fill out the quick survey so that we can find out more about you and deliver content and information that you as a listener want to hear from us, both Wendy Batts and I, Ken Miller, on Random Fit. So do that and you will be a contender to win a $100 Amazon gift card. So good luck to you on that one. But first, let us know what you want out of us, and we'll do what we can to provide you the entertainment and information you're expecting from Random Fit. So like, follow, subscribe, download, rate us, give us 5 stars if available, comment, and please share. Do that and let us know, and we'll do what we can to get you some information and content you're looking for on Random Fit. So until next time, everybody, take care and be well.